Amen. So I'm coming from, Matthew. We're going to talk a little bit about Peter walking on the water, but just a little bit of a new kind of look at it. So if we go to Matthew 14, 22 to 33, and I'm going to kind of go a little speedily because I only got 5 to 7 minutes, and I can talk. So, and straightway Jesus, you have it, say amen? Amen. Matthew 14, 22 to 23. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciple to get into a ship and to go over before him onto the other side while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent the multitude away, he went up into the mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, Is it a spirit? And they cried out for fear. And I'm reading from the New King James Version. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubtest? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art God. So we all basically know the story of Peter walking on the water, and he saw the wind, and he got afraid. But when I was looking at it, Jesus was pointing out to me that we oftentimes point out that Peter stopped looking at God and he began to sink. But he said, but have you considered that Peter took God out of the box? That Peter also went from fellowship to relationship with God. Right. And it reminded me of Terry when she says all of these ships should be taking you somewhere, right? So he was in a ship, he had fellowship, but he moved to a relationship. Amen. So in verse 22, what Jesus pointed out to me is that Jesus gave the disciples instructions on what he wanted them to do and a destination. The outcome, get into the ship and meet me on the other side, right? So when God gives us an instruction, he also has a destination in mind for us. And if he told you to go somewhere, he's going to provide to make sure you get there. Amen? So Jesus said in verse 23, it took a while for Jesus to send 5,000 men and women, because he had just fed the 5,000, to get them dispersed, and then he took even more time to pray. So in verse 24, it says, by this time the ship was in the midst of the sea in a storm. The wind was contrary. So it didn't say that the disciples, at this point, it didn't say the disciples were afraid that they were in a ship and that the wind, they were pretty much in a storm. And God pointed out to me, he says, sometimes when we're in a storm, we got to remember the last storm that he took us out of, right? Because it said back in Matthew 8, they were in a storm before they got to the Matthew 14 storm. And they remembered that they were in the ship, the waves was coming, water was getting in the ship, and they were afraid. Went down there, Jesus, carest thou not that we perish? And Jesus was like, oh, you have little faith. And he calmed the wind. So now they're in a ship, and they remember, and wait, I don't care about this wind, because a couple of weeks ago, months ago, he already did it, right? So we can rest assuredly while we on this journey. Amen. So, and then in verse 25, it says the fourth watch, being like 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., Jesus came walking on the water. Verse 26, it says, now the disciples became afraid, saying, is it a spirit? So they had no fear because they knew what had happened before. They experienced that before. Now Jesus is walking on water, something totally new, and they're not sure if it's a spirit or if it's really him. This is a new experience. We're going to go through new experiences with God as we all go along this journey. But we still have to recognize, what did God say? Go and you're going to get here. So keep in mind, whenever you're on a journey and you're going through stuff, remember, God promised you something. And if he promised it, he is faithful to bring you to it and fulfill it. So we can look at the storm and not be afraid. And then a new circumstance come up and we can still kind of don't be afraid. Don't be unbothered, right? Don't be unbothered. It's me, Jesus. I'm here. I'm with you. So now the disciples were afraid, and then Jesus comforted them and said, it's me, right? So when we do become afraid, we got to listen for God's voice, and he'll comfort you. He'll let you know what to do, if you move, if you stand still, if you do this, if you do that. But just assuredly, he'll let you know he's there. Jesus comforted them and said, it's me. And Peter said, if it's you, allow me to come on the water. A new thing, right? They've just now seen Jesus walking on the water, a new experience. And Peter is bold enough to say, Lord, let me do what you're doing. I'm coming into, I have fellowship with you. I've seen you go through this. I've seen you do this. And fellowship is nothing but a friendly association, right? Because you had some of the same interests. But Peter, in this instance, was saying, I don't want a friendly fellowship anymore. Lord, let me do what you're doing. It's time for a relationship with you. I done seen enough of what you have been doing, what you did. You fed them, you did this, you calmed that, you calmed this. He says, now I want to know you. I want to really know you. So let me come and do what you're doing. And Jesus said, come. So Peter got out of the ship. And I tell you, it's a difference between a ship and a boat. He didn't just step overboard and start walking. The Bible tells us that in verse 29, it said he had to come down out of that ship to get to the water, which means he had enough time to change his mind. He had a decision that he made, and he was okay if he would have changed his mind. But Jesus said, come. So Peter said, okay, let me take God out of the box. Right? He calmed the wind in the last one. Let me take God out of the box. And the Bible never said that the storm ceased, the wind wasn't blowing, right? Peter walking on water while this wind is blowing and the storm is raging. But in his mind, all he was focusing on is, let me get to Jesus. Let me get to Jesus. He said, I can come, which means I can do this, right? And so Peter, we get to the point where Peter gets to Jesus and he sees the wind and he began to sink. And God was like, Peter did not see the wind because you can't see the wind. What had happened was that Satan put an experience in his head. He didn't remember that God calmed the wind the last time. He remembered that the wind was tearing up the ship and we were about to drown. So instead of remembering that God calmed the wind, he said, oh my God, I remember last time I was in the wind. And he began to sink. Amen? And so, let me get ahead of myself. And he began to sink. What Peter realized at that point is that the last time God did this, when the wind was blowing, he spoke to the wind, and the wind ceased. He didn't speak to the wind this time. He spoke to Peter, and he said, come. Without circumstance, without a second hesitation, without thinking about what's going on, come. Without looking at what's going on around you, what's coming ahead, the troubles of this world, come. Come. Because he says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Amen. So he said, come. So Peter realized, wait, he didn't speak to the wind this time because the wind is still going. But Peter needed to realize, Peter, I'm taking you from fellowship to relationship. I'm not speaking to that inanimate object no more. I'm speaking to you directly. I don't have to speak to the inanimate object. When I speak to you and I tell you, you just trust and believe my word. Take me at my word. He said, you already done came out of the box. You took me out of the box. You took me out of a box. Why are you surprised at where you are? What God pointed out to me is that Peter walked, it said Jesus was afar off, right? Peter walked on that water to the point where he was right in front of Jesus. Right in front of Jesus. Because it says when he began to sink and he said, save me, Lord, he just reached out his hand. The Bible don't say he ran to Peter to catch him. It don't say he stretched out, took a few steps to catch him. Peter was right there, right at the point of his breakthrough. His miracle still happened because he was walking on water. Nobody else had ever done it other than Jesus. Well, that they saw. Right at the brink. And here come the devil. You standing right before Jesus. You done walked all this way with the storm raging, right? Not paying that no attention. And then here come the devil. Well, you know, it's still wind. The wind is blowing. Remember last time when the wind was blowing? You remember last time y'all almost sank? Yes, I remember. But I remember Jesus spoke. And all he has to do is speak. So like the 3 Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace, my God will deliver me. And if he don't, he's still God. He still could have. Amen. And so, in closing, I wanted to make the point that we're moving from a fellowship, just a friendly acquaintance. I know God. I heard about him. I seen what he's done. But we're moving into a relationship where it's no longer what I read, what I saw, and what I heard. It's what I have experienced. Amen. So we can speak with conviction. We can speak and we can draw people closer because we tell of our experience with Jesus. Amen. And then in closing, it says, well, after they were out there and Jesus helped them, they went back to the ship. Then the wind ceased. Another example of God being in the midst of your storm with you instead of taking you out of it. Because they had to walk back to the ship, get in it, and then the wind ceased. So just continue to trust in God, move towards that relationship where it's a one-on-one, because there were 12 people in that boat, in that ship, and only one got out, and only one drew closer. One took God out of the box and moved from fellowship to a relationship. Amen.